Hello once more, and welcome to Bible Talk with Bruce and Becky, aka in some quarters as Fun with Flags. Remember our constant appeal, don't send money.
Okay.
Well, my dear, let's try to get through Noah's flood today if possible.
Okay.
To swim beyond it. The flood account is found in Genesis chapter 6, 7, and 8. And there are some questions we can deal with, which to me are peripheral in nature, but the people spend, yes, peripheral.
They're not perpendicular.
No, not perpendicular, peripheral. People spend a lot of time and spill a lot of ink on such questions. The first is, how widespread was this flood? Was it a global flood? Or perhaps a more local or regional flood? Thank you for the visual effects. Well, Becky, what's your opinion? How widespread was this flood?
When I read it, it says that all of the high mountains were covered.
Yeah, let's just read that.
Okay, where is it?
Chapter 7, verse 19. The waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed above the mountains from 15 cubits upward, and all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. Everything on dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens. As you indicated, that sounds pretty global in nature.
Universal, right.
Universal. Notice how many times the word all occurs. All the high mountains, all the living things on all the earth. However, I'm going to argue, not very long or very hard, that the flood may have been a regional flood. Here's my thinking on that. How much did the people of Moses' time, including Moses himself, know about the extent of the earth? Did they know that it was a globe? Did they know about places such as North and South America, Australia, the far eastern regions? I'm inclined to think that without misleading the original readers, Moses could have said it covered all the mountains and killed all the animals and other living things on the earth that was known to him. I know of nothing in the Bible to indicate that God gave special knowledge of scientific and historical and geographical nature to the people who were writing the Old Testament. So I'm inclined to think it was regional. You look as if there was some doubt.
Well, I've got this thing going on in my head. Yes, Moses wrote it, but God knows where everything is and whether or not everything was covered.
That's true. However, I don't think God dictated this book to Moses, and I can't think of any reason that he would have to include other places that were unknown to the people of that time. And we don't know the date of the flood. We don't know how much of the world was inhabited at that time. And I mentioned before, I think last time, that Australia, for example, has animals found nowhere else on the earth. Did they have to make their way into the flood? Did God create new species after the flood for Australia's sake? And there are logistical problems with a worldwide flood covering all the high mountains. I don't have all the information at hand, but it would seem to take more water than was available to do that. However, I'm just expressing my opinion. I think it was a flood that covered the area known to people at that time.
So what was the purpose of destroying the animals? Because they could just replenish themselves from elsewhere.
I don't.
What was the purpose of putting them on the ark and saving them?
I don't know that there were animals elsewhere. We just don't know the condition of the earth or when the flood took place. But they saved the animals that were in that region rather than have to bring them in from elsewhere if they were elsewhere. Horses, for example, were not in North and South America at this time. They were brought in later by the Spaniards. But I'll not debate it further. You want to say something else?
One theory is that there really was only one continent at the time.
Only one landmass?
Yeah.
That's a theory, but
and many of the mountains may not have existed. The geography of the earth was altered completely by the flood, in my opinion.
There is some indication in the account that the fountains of the Great Deep were broken up, and there could have been some mountain making during this flood year.
It might even have broken up the one continent, which is, even geologists say that there weren't all these different continents.
That's true, although geologists don't think that the flood account, the biblical account, fits with what they know about those things. As I said, I'm not going to debate it, be it as a peripheral issue. I just raised the possibility that there's more than one way of looking at it.
And I will say that believing that it was a universal flood is no more a test of your faith than believing that the earth was created in only 7 days.
That's true. God could have done it however he wanted to. Another issue is, could you get all the animals on the ark, and how would you take care of them for a year when they were there? I was reading one account that said there are 21,000 known species of animals, and if you had two of every kind, and there were really more than that, you'd have to have 42,000 animals on the big boat. But there are other ways of looking at that too. For example, you wouldn't have to bring on every species of dog. We're told that dogs all evolved from wolves. So bring on a pair of wolves, and they can make other species later. The same with horses or others. And it's not necessary that they brought full-grown animals onto the ark. They could have brought babies.
And most animals mature in a year, or not much more than a year, in order to procreate.
But how would you, being one of 8 people, like to feed all of those animals and dispose of their waste during that year? I wouldn't.
They might have been hibernating.
That's another
possibility. I will say that louder because I don't speak up. They might have been hibernating.
Yes, many different kinds of animals are able to hibernate under certain circumstances.
Like a universal flood.
Can this marriage be saved? Can it survive the flood? Well, it has for 50 years. What others was I going to bring up here?
Besides the universal flood.
Yeah. You've thrown me off my track. Not for the first time. I have derailed.
That's how I got you in the first place.
we won't go into that. It's too late to rehash that. Really, these are kind of looking at the sideshows and missing the main event, perhaps.
Which was?
What would you say is the main point of the flood story that we're supposed to get?
That we need to be faithful to God and not revert to our lesser natures and be violent and horrible people. And
okay, good point. But I will revert to my original statement when we started this study that Genesis and the rest of the Bible is really about God. This story is not mainly about Noah or the ark or the animals on the ark. It's about God and his nature. And one thing we can learn from it is that God does, although He's very patient and merciful, He does have His limits when it comes to wickedness. And God reached that point and said, that's enough. People on the earth become so corrupt that I'm going to wipe them out. But Noah and his family found favor. God always shows grace. Noah is not the main character in this story. For one thing, he never speaks during the whole flood account. Have you ever noticed that? Noah says nary a word.
He's a man of action.
That's right. The strong silent type. It's not about Noah. It's not about the ark. It's mainly about God. Which brings me back to my track that I was on before. This is not the only account of a flood that's found in ancient literature. Although I've heard some preachers claim that flood accounts are found in every culture, that's a bit of an exaggeration. For example, the Egyptians have no flood story in their literature or their tradition. So another reason to think maybe it was confined to the Mediterranean area or to the Mesopotamian area primarily. But there are some flood accounts from Mesopotamia older than the book of Genesis. For example, in the Atrahasis epic and its companion, the Gilgamesh epic.
We already talked about that.
Well, not this.
Okay.
There are flood accounts. But notice the difference between the gods in those accounts and God in the book of Genesis. Those gods are somewhat peevish and arbitrary and even immature in their thoughts and behavior. They get upset because the human beings have become too noisy and decide to wipe them out, but it's not a unanimous verdict from the gods. One of the gods who favors Gilgamesh lets him in on the secret, Utnapishtim, the hero of the flood story in Gilgamesh, tells him to build a boat, and he survives through the 7-day flood. Unlike the year-long flood in Genesis, this flood lasts 7 days. And during that 7 days, the gods have come to regret that they wiped out humankind, they think, because they're hungry. And they depended on mankind to feed them.
Makes no sense.
It doesn't make sense, but that's the way their gods are presented. And no more nonsensical than the gods of the Greeks and Romans, for that matter, later on. So when Utnapishtim gets out of the ark, or his boat, and offers a sacrifice, we're told that the gods flock around like flies because they smell the sweet aroma of the sacrifice and they can now get something to eat again. How different from the flood account in Genesis, where a righteous, holy God cannot endure violence and other sin on the earth any longer. But God makes account for what will happen after the flood, that never again will he destroy the earth by water. By the way, in those Mesopotamian flood accounts, they also send out birds to see if the flood has subsided, leading people. Just a few similarities like that to Genesis, because there's even scholarly types to say that Moses copied from those. I would propose that Moses knew about those accounts and he demythologizes them. He gets rid of the silliness about the many gods and their hunger and so on. And he may even be, Genesis first 11 chapters seems to sustain a polemic against these other beliefs of the people round about. Becky will remind us what a polemic is.
Sermon, right?
It can be a sermon.
Argument.
An argument, there you go. An argument against a certain position, especially. And Moses may be consciously doing that. Now let's get to the end of the flood story. And the turning point of the flood story is chapter 8, verse 1. Would you read that for us, Becky?
Then God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the animals that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters subsided.
Go ahead and read through verse 5.
The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were also stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained, and the waters receded continually from the earth. At the end of 150 days, the waters decreased. Then the ark rested in the 7th month, the 17th day of the month, on the mountains of Ararat, and the waters decreased continually until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the 1st day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen.
Okay. In some ways, the flood account reverses the account of creation at the opening of Genesis, which began with watery chaos and God organized everything and brought it into being. Now the organized earth is wiped out and ends up with a new creation. After reverting to watery chaos, God brings a new creation into the world, letting the animals go and beginning again with mankind, with Noah and his family. So in some sense, Noah is the second Adam.
Don't forget his wife.
Who? Mrs. Noah?
Mrs. Noah.
It's easy to forget his wife and his son's wives because their names are not given. But we've dealt with that some, and we'll encounter this kind of patriarchal structure as we move on through Genesis. I don't believe God's original intent, as we said, was for man to dominate woman, but sin brings that about in human society. Well, where did the ark end up?
The mountains
of Ararat. It literally says it rested against the mountains of Ararat. It may not have been at the top of a peak. Now, much has been said in recent years, and people have had expeditions to try to find the ark on what's known now as Mount Ararat in Armenia, near the border of Turkey and Russia, a mountain over 17,000 feet in height. By the way, we might consider if the ark did end up on the top or somewhere up on Mount Ararat, how would you get all those animals down from a 17,000 foot mountain?
Parachute.
I guess. You can see those elephants and hippos making it down the mountain. It takes specialized climbing gear to get up and down it now. In spite of all of this publicity and so on, the Bible does not say that the ark rested on Mount Ararat. In fact, until fairly recent times historically, that mountain was not known as Mount Ararat. It says it ended somewhere on the mountain range of Ararat. People have claimed to have seen the ark on Mount Ararat, to have photographed it, to have brought down gopher wood from the mountain, although nobody really knows what gopher wood is. But people don't pay enough attention to the details. They get excited about these stories. One possibility is that one time there was a monastery on Mount Ararat, and some indications that the people in that monastery built a replica of the ark to try to attract pilgrims. I don't know, I haven't researched that carefully, but I can say with pretty much confidence nobody's going to find the ark these days because we don't know where it ended up.
Well, if the earth lasts another 1,000 years or so, people will think it was in Kentucky.
You're right. Not to denigrate the site in Kentucky where they have a replica of the ark. I'd like to visit that sometime. But yeah, people again are missing the forest for the gopher wood. The point of the flood story is not where the ark ended up, how they took care of all those animals for a year.
If it were that important, it would be there.
I wouldn't argue with that. But as the Peter's first letter says, it's first or second, I always forget which one of the letters of Peter these things are in. People forget when they scoff about the coming of Christ and about the end of the world. People forget that God did destroy the world one time because of wickedness. He has promised there will be fire next time. It also kind of helps us get a biblical world view. That according to the biblical worldview, there's a beginning and an end of time. That the world had a beginning, and God will bring it to an end with the coming of Christ and the final judgment. We in America don't always recognize that most people in the world don't believe that time has a beginning and an end. They have what's called a circular view of time. That everything goes through a certain number of years and then starts all over. That's the view of many Eastern religions, and I was interested to learn when I did some teaching in Africa that it's a view of many of the African tribes. If you go through a certain period, a cycle of history, and then it all starts over and repeats exactly as it did before. There is no end. There is no beginning. The Bible teaches us God created the world with a purpose in mind, and He is moving it toward a conclusion. And there'll be new heavens and new earth, and the final goal of this world. Well, it's about time to wrap up here. Anything you'd like to add, Ms. Becky?
We're going to talk about the rainbow next time, right?
We will, if you like.
I want to talk a little bit about the nature of water, because when I think about it, I praise God. I just am enthralled by the nature of that element. It's not an element, is it?
It doesn't matter. We know what water.
H2O. It's made up of two elements.
Are you suggesting that H2O is one of God's greatest creations?
I would say so.
By the way, I was just reading recently again. Although we've been able to identify, that is, astronomers, a number of exoplanets, they're called, outside of our solar system. None of them seem to have enough water to sustain the kind of life we have on Earth. An interesting bit of information to ponder. But until then, I want to wish everybody, all of you and your loved ones, a very Merry Christmas. And we hope to post our next episode on Sunday, the day after Christmas.
I will encourage you to find a place where you can worship this weekend. If you're used to going to church, keep going. If you have not been in a while, check it out. I mean, that's where it's happening.
You're right. Okay, thanks again, and bye-bye, everybody.